Hello, friends. Welcome back. We're doing a language analysis paper in our ELA class. We're starting a unit on the diary of Anne Frank. And so with this paper, we want to get a sense of the context and the circumstances in which Anne Frank wrote her diary. We want to analyze a historical informative text. We want to find definitions in that text, and then we're going to watch a video about Anne Frank's life, answer some questions with complete sentences, and then finally we're going to do some more analysis of language that has to do with Anne Frank and her writing. So let's get to the assignment. If you could make sure that you take that out now, please. So this is what the assignment looks like, and you should have it either emailed to you or you've taken it off Nearpod or one way or another that I sent it to you. It could be as a PDF, and maybe you've printed it and you're doing it by hand, or you're working on it as a Word document, or you're working on it in Nearpod. However you're doing it, just follow along, and you might have to adjust a little bit to how I'm working on my assignment. So the content objectives, we want to introduce World War II and the Holocaust as the context and setting for Anne Frank's story. The language acquisition topics are we want to be able to define terms with textual evidence. We want to analyze text, and we're going to particularly look at clause structure on side 2. So let's get to it. Our learning objectives. I can define terms associated with World War II and the Holocaust based on textual evidence. I can analyze text for participants, process, circumstance, conjunctions, definitions, and subject and predicate. I can discuss and write answers to questions on Anne Frank based on a video and text. The main ideas of this lesson. The Holocaust and World War II are the context behind the story of Anne Frank's diary. The annex, where she hid with her family, and the Van Pels family and Dr. Pfeffer are the setting and characters. Students understand more of what they read by adding discussion and analysis of language. So they're the main ideas of this lesson. And so section 3 has 3 paragraphs to read and to discuss and to analyze. And if you're watching this video, you've clicked on this link. There's another link here, Introduction to World War II and the Holocaust, and that is from the Encyclopedia of the Holocaust at the United States Holocaust Museum, I think. That was where that came from. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the 3 paragraphs to you, and then I'm going to do some sample analysis. We're going to underline any definitions with purple, and then we're going to find any participants or entities, ideas, and these are the nouns and noun groups, processes and actions, which are verbs or made by verbs, circumstances of where and when. We'll look for prepositions to do this, and certain connecting words. And these connecting words are the words that join together 2 clauses. And remember, a clause is where the ideas are in English. Every clause has a subject, something to talk about, and a predicate, information about the subject. So those linking words join together 2 ideas in one sentence. And so once we find those definitions, we're going to either copy down or cut and paste the definitions that we find in this text. And then we have a video on Anne Frank and answering some questions. And then for section 6, you'll have another video. So let's read section 3. The story of Anne Frank and the Holocaust take place during World War II. World War II was a 6-year military conflict that killed over 80,000 people. The war was fought on 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. The war in Europe began in September of 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. By May of 1940, Germany's military had invaded and taken over many European countries, including Poland, France, Belgium, and the country where Anne Frank and her family were living, the Netherlands. Germany at that time was ruled by a fascist dictator, Adolf Hitler, and his political party, the Nazis. Fascism is an oppressive political system that values and promotes racial or nationalistic identities. Fascists demand obedience to their ideas and rules and are often led by a single powerful dictator. The Nazis believed that Germans were superior humans and that nature had given them the power and the right to control all of Europe. The Nazis hated all non-Europeans who lived in Europe, such as Jews. Anne Frank and her family were Jews who left Germany when the Nazis came to power. The family settled in the country of the Netherlands. Jews are members of the community of people who are culturally associated with the religion of Judaism and who trace their ancestry back to the Hebrew people of Israel. The Nazis were anti-Semites. Anti-Semitism is the prejudice against and the hatred of Jewish people. The Nazis wanted to oppress and kill all the people that they hated, such as Jews, socialists, Roma, Gypsies, homosexuals, and the disabled. The Holocaust was the Nazi-sponsored systematic persecution and murder of the people that the Nazis hated, particularly European Jews. Jews from all of the Nazi-controlled countries, such as the Netherlands, were taken to camps where they had to work as slave labor or were killed. Many European Jews tried to hide from the Nazis or escape Europe. The Diary of Anne Frank takes place while Anne and her family were hiding from the Nazis. World War II in Europe and the Holocaust ended with the death of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany's surrender in May of 1945. So there's the text. Let's go back and find any definitions. And I've underlined here, and if you're using a Word doc, you can just copy and paste that line, and you can then stretch that out. For example, here's the definition of World War II. World War II was, and I'm going to paste it again, World War II was a 6-year military conflict that killed over 80 million people. So there's the definition of World War II. And if you don't, if you're doing this on PDF, you can also use your draw, make a pen and make it purple, and you can also underline that way. Okay. So let's go down here and find the next definition. Germany at that time was ruled by a fascist dictator, Adolf Hitler, and his political party, the Nazis. Fascism is an oppressive political system. So that is going to be a definition. Notice how we went from fascist to fascism. So what we did there is we took an adjective describing what kind of a dictator, fascist dictator, and we turned that word fascist into a noun. So the adjective became a noun, fascism. And that, my friends, is called nominalization, and it is a very common trick used in English, particularly English of science and history, when you're making informational text. So now we have the definition of fascism. Fascists demanded obedience to their ideas and rules and are often led by a single powerful dictator. The Nazis believed that Germans were superior humans and that nature had given them power and the right to control of Europe. Nazis hated all Europeans who did not live who lived in Europe, such as Jews. Anne Frank and her family were Jews who left Germany when the Nazis came to power. The family settled in the country of the Netherlands. Jews are members of the community. That is a definition. Who are Jews? Jews are members of the community of people who are culturally associated with the religion of Judaism and who trace their ancestry back to the Hebrew people of Israel. Good. The Nazis were anti-Semites. Anti-Semitism is the prejudice against and hatred of Jewish people. There is our definition of anti-Semitism. And there are other definitions, and I'm going to let you find them, such as the Holocaust. I guess there's only one more left in there. I'll let you find that and underline it with purple, whether you're doing it with a ruler and a marker at home, or whether you're cutting and pasting the line like I did, or whether you're using the draw function. Okay, so let's go down to the highlighting section. And we want to highlight participants, entities, ideas. So the things or the part of a sentence or a clause that are things or ideas made with nouns and noun phrases. We also want to highlight the actions or the processes with pink. And those are going to be verbs, circumstances of where and when with orange. Let's go to the top here and let us get out our highlighter. And we're going to go with yellow to start. For example, the story of Anne Frank. That is one thing, even though it's a few words, it's one thing. The Holocaust. They take place during World War II. 3 words, one thing. World War II was a 6-year military conflict. So a 6-year military conflict, see how that is also one thing. So we've got descriptions of the conflict, like military and 6-year. They give us information about the conflict that killed over 80 million people. The war was fought on 3 continents. Asia, Africa, and Europe. The war in Europe began September of 1939. I'm going to highlight that as a thing. It's a day when Germany invaded Poland by May of 1940. Germany's military. So that's one thing. It's a special kind of military. It's Germany's military. And so we've got a description or a quality or a characteristic, property. All these are very similar terms, but in this case, it's an adjective describing military. European countries, such as Poland, France, Belgium, and the country, all one thing. The country where Anne Frank and her family were living, the Netherlands. All one long phrase that is one thing, and that is the Netherlands, the country where Anne Frank and her family were hiding. And I think that's enough of those. I think that you get how to do that. It's going to be pretty easy for you. For example, Germany, a fascist dictator. Who was that? That was Adolf Hitler. Fascist dictator. What kind of a dictator? A fascist dictator. A description, but it's still one thing. All right. So now you know how to do the participants. I use this pink here. This is a very bright pink, and it's so bright that it kind of like makes the words hard to read. So I'm going to use this rose-colored pink. And so we're doing actions with this. The story of Anne Frank and the Holocaust take place. World War II was a 6-year military that killed over 80 million. War was fought on 3 continents. The war in Europe began in September of 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Notice how we're beginning to fill in all of the words. Had invaded, taken over, was ruled. And you see how once I have the yellow done, once I know what the participants are, I know that they are not going to be the action words, the verbs. Political party, the Nazis, that actually should be, that's actually could be in yellow. Fascism is an oppressive political system that values and promotes a racial or nationalistic identity. Fascists demand obedience and are often led, often describes how they were led, often, but I'm going to make that all one action, are often led. Nazis believed that Germans were superior and that nature had given them. And I'm going to leave the others for you. And what you're going to notice is that just by doing these, the participants, the actions, the circumstances of where and when, and the connecting words, you pretty much are going to underline or highlight every word. So what am I doing here? I'm doing connecting words. I'm doing circumstances of where and when. For example, it takes place during World War II. So the story of Anne Frank and the Holocaust takes place during. When? During World War II. That killed over, more than over 80 people. Where is it? It's above. The number is above. It's where? On 3 continents. Where? On 3 continents. 3 is a description of content. Where? In Europe. The war, which war? The war in Europe began in. When? In. So all of these words tell us where or when. Did you notice that? During World War II. When? During World War II. Where? On the continents. Where? In Europe. When? In September of 1939. By. When? By May. At that time. Okay. Let's go to the connecting words that join together ideas. So these are not any connecting word, like and is a very common connecting word, but the ones that we're looking for are only when and is being used to join together 2 clauses or 2 ideas to make one sentence with it. So those are the ones that we're looking for. And let's see. The story of Anne Frank and the Holocaust. See how there's no verb here? So this and can't be joined to 2 clauses together, because a clause, again, has to have a subject, something to talk about, and a predicate. And a predicate will always have a verb in it. That killed. World War II was a 6-year military conflict. Subject, World War II. Predicate, was a 6-year military conflict. That, what does that mean? That means the conflict. That killed over 80 million people. See how there's 2 verbs? And so that means that there's 2 subjects and predicates, because in this case, that is the subject and it means the military conflict. When? The war in Europe began in September of 1939. Subject, the war in Europe. Predicate, began in September of 1939. New clause, when Germany invaded Poland. Subject, Germany. Predicate, invaded Poland. Where, the country where Anne Frank and her family were living. That needs a verb right there, because were living. Were living is the verb. Where is the connecting word? Subject, Anne Frank and her family. Predicate, were living in the Netherlands. Fascism is an oppressive political system. Subject, fascism. Predicate is an oppressive political system. That, what, oops. I messed that up. I was supposed to go back to green. Fascism is an oppressive political system. Subject, fascism. That's what we're talking about. Information about fascism is an oppressive political system. That's one idea. Now we're going to connect another idea that values and promotes a racial or nationalistic identity. What does that mean? That means an oppressive political system. That's what that means. So that is a connecting word that points back to information earlier in the sentence. And I'm going to let you finish this with your teacher and your friends in your group, and you should have a basic idea how to do this. So once you find these definitions, such as the definition of World War II, World War II was a 6-year military conflict that killed over 80 million people, then you can put that definition here. Same thing with fascism and these other definitions. So when you're done with the definitions, move on to this section, section 5. And what you're going to do is you're going to watch this video. The video is made by the Anne Frank house, which is the house where Anne Frank hid during the war. And that is now a museum. And so the museum and the company associated with the museum make videos and other things. And that's a video about Anne Frank. And there's a lot of information at that website. And you got to answer these questions with complete sentences. Part of Anne Frank's diary was a collection of sentences that she had read or written that she called beautiful sentences. And I want you to make sure that you start writing beautiful sentences as your answers. All right. Thank you so much for your attention. And I will make another video for the last section. I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.